Basically, I am somebody who's been working in this industry, working in freelance video game audio for 4 to 5 years now, and I kind of wanted to take the opportunity to record this video to go over some do's and don'ts of hiring and working with freelance sound designers. This is primarily for the benefit of indie game developers, so that you can, appropriately source and hire and work with an artist like myself and run into minimal problems, or basically learn how you would integrate somebody like me into your pipeline so that you can reap the benefits of some really great audio in your project. So basically, the topics covered in this video specifically are going to be more on video game sound designing and freelancing, right? So a few key understandings. Sound design is like a form of audio post, though involved in different ways in the game development pipeline. One of the first and key points and tenets I'd share here is that sound as a project as a whole, sound in a game project, right? Or any kind of multimedia as a whole, is like a post process, meaning that you should add sound to a game when you're in the 3/4 through the project, or at least halfway point stage of your game, right? You don't want to be hiring somebody necessarily too early, because you might not have anything to work on. And then the other key to this is you don't want to hire someone too late, because then you're scrambling and the quality is not going to reach the level that your project probably deserves, right? So, but the problem also is that if you're too early, then I don't have anything to add audio to, and then it's difficult to concept that experience, right? It can depend, right? If you hire me early in the project, we can do conceptual sound design, which is the process of just I'm gonna work on assets, and then we can kind of figure out the direction we want to go for, artistically. But then there's nothing for me to necessarily work on. But the reason this is a post process is because I say don't start treating audio like I can work on things, and then you guys can go ahead and finish your systems and animations, and then tell me, okay, well, now everything's been finished. Because the problem is that when you start moving pieces around when I'm also working on them, then it results in our stuff being mismatched. And the way game development goes ideally, and with a sound person actually integrated as part of your team, is it's like an ecosystem, right? So that means that if you start moving pieces around, if they're interrelated, and depending on how deep the hooks are in the animation or the code work for the sound, you could throw everything off, right? So that's just a key point I wanted to make here. Next up, I wanted to talk about the importance of middleware, audio middleware. So we're talking about Fmod Studio, Wise. Those are the two most well-known and popular ones in the industry, right? So, and I want to talk about the importance of this. So I would say before hiring a sound professional, it's actually really important to consider what type of project it is you're creating and the depth of sound support that it needs, right? So this is absolutely critically important if you're building a large-scale game experience. Please do not think about throwing a shoestring budget at your audio department and think your game can rely on very simple one-shot triggers and sound drag-and-drop implementation. I can promise you from various background experiences of my own, this is not the way to go, right? It's all relative. It's relative to the complexity of the game, the project that you're working on, right? Are you working on something that literally only needs simple sound effects, just a couple of shots here and there? Then you could probably get away with something like that. But if it's anything more ambitious, something that actually interacts with player feedback, then you need, it might actually be in your best interest to consider looking at an Fmod Studio or a Wise. The only reason I'm talking about this part specifically is because I have been met with some resistance from clients before, and developers who weren't 100% sure about working with something like that. And I can tell you that if your game is any level of complex, as far as the mechanics go, the systems, and then subsequently the audio, which shouldn't just be a grafted on feature, but it should be part of the whole package, then you would probably want to make use of something like this for game parameters, even just for dynamic mixing. Do you want the mix to sound really pro? Do you want your game to actually sound awesome when it changes and pieces of it move around? Then you should highly consider using something like Wise, right? This goes in tandem with the last point that I just made, but basically you want to allow your sound designer person like access to your source code, essentially like your source control or whatever you're working with, because the way that the process is going to go is that I'll make sound effects, push them to you guys through a source control update. And typically the way it goes is like once events are in place and sounds are working in the game, it's typically like an artistic process, the same way that your art would be in your project, right? It's going to be like an iteration over time, like as the project goes on. So it's going to be important for us to be able to pull and push data back and forth together, especially if we're working together in the coding department, right? To get like some sound functionalities up and functional. This is just to give you an idea of like what you could expect when you're working on a contract with like on a longer term basis with a sound designer, right? I don't actually see a whole lot of good content out there like this, like a whole bunch of good videos surrounding like what are some of the best practices when trying to do this kind of thing, right? So that's why I figured I would tackle it. So if you're ever concerned about, you know, an audio person touching certain features that the rest of the development team is working on, you can typically make use of like on Plastic, or I've used this in Git before. You can work on different branches. Sometimes you have concerns concerns like binary files, like a prefab or like a Unity scene, which I know are notorious for like not necessarily merging the best, like just basically the binary files, right? You can look at different source control options or different workflows for how to tackle this. Like maybe the sound person works the best on this day when given access to these specific files, or for source control tools, you can use, I believe it was Subversion from Perforce, gives you the option to actually have two people's changes work in tandem. Or that was actually in one team that I worked with. They had that custom coded for us, but that was really useful, right? That's an example where, you know, expect that like if I'm getting into your project and working on it, that I'm going to need to get into a map file. I'm going to need to access an animation, right? So like I should be like accounted for in that workflow, right? Okay, next I want to talk a little bit on the actual like artistic integrity of sound design and what like sound design actually is for you, like for developers that really don't actually know what that process itself actually looks like. Take it as I'm your sound artist, I'm your audio artist, the same way that you would hire your 3D or your visual artist, right? Like when you hire me and I look at the work that needs to be done, I have an inclination, like an artistic sense of like how I feel that would sound best, or how that would really like work, right? Like ideas behind like mechanically how that would sound, or like metaphysically, right? If it's not something that's tangible like magic or arcane powers, for example, right? So usually what I would say is that if you have an idea behind the style and like a reference piece in mind, like a game that you kind of can picture for like the quality of what your game's sound should be like, that's like an excellent reference point. I would suggest putting that like somewhere for us to see, right? But I think it's important to know that like basically I'm saying like share that stuff up front if you think of it, right? But what I'm saying that's important to know is that like you should defer to my judgment with this too, right? Like it's not going to necessarily go the greatest if a client is like micromanaging and like has like an ironclad fist over like stylistically how it should go, because this is a collaboration, right? It's a collaborative effort. Should go without saying, right? Like I'm a sound designer, I'm an artist, I have an artistic sense about me, my ideas too, right? So that's important, right? Like there are times you work with clients who realistically they actually don't really know what they're looking for, but that's why you've hired me. That's why you like defer to my judgment and allow me to like take a stab at this right before you maybe you critique it, right? Lastly, for this video at least, I think I'm going to touch on the idea of voice acting. So sound designers are the people who are going to be making your sound effects. We're not necessarily going to be directly involved. Like we might not be directly involved in the process of your voice acting for your project. However, I would highly suggest like any competent audio person that you're hiring, like such as myself, who might be like an audio director, like overseeing and managing the whole pipeline of the project, I highly suggest you give them some insight and like leeway into what you're doing as far as like who you're hiring for voice talent, and like lending their thoughts and skill set to what they can do with the voice. Because like I might have an idea for how voices should be implemented, I might have ideas for how voices should be sounding with a post-process applied. I will likely also even have opinions on like the quality of the recording that's being offered, both in terms of the raw waveform files that are sent over. Like I could tell you the quality of the mic it was recorded on, or B, just the quality of the acting itself, right? Like we can have like a good insight on all those types of things. And if you want like a game that has consistent voice experience across the whole thing and something that's actually in accordance with the rest of the sound style, I would highly advocate like involving your audio person, like your sort of sound freelancer on that. And that's kind of the last point I wanted to make here. I'm sure there's going to be more to this. There's a lot to this topic, and so I can kind of take it in any direction from here, but like there may be subsequent videos where I add more detailed information on this topic. It's something, like I said, I feel is sorely lacking in the community as far as like audio indie sound development goes. So thanks a lot for listening, and take care.